So, a little trigger warning before we start. What I'm going to talk about today um, is going to be related to being queer, um, trauma. So, if that's not something that you're in the right headspace to listen to, maybe just skip this video. Yeah. So, I wanted to talk about something that has been a big part of my life when I was younger. And as much as I've grown out of it, away from it, grown from it, it is still a big part of it is still, like, time wise speaking, about a third of the number of years I've lived so far. So it is a pretty big portion of my life, and it's something that I wanted to talk about, but I always find a bit difficult to talk about because of like the trigger warnings I mentioned earlier, of the queer themes and the underlying trauma related underpinnings of it. So I mean, well, I'll just tell it like a story, I guess. So what I'm gonna talk about is a relationship that I have with my best friend of 10 plus years, from when I was like 8 years old till I was like 20 something years old. And I think it's a particular relationship that is difficult to talk about because of the many layers that it contains. Like, I've talked about it to people in certain facets of this relationship, in the sense that it was a friendship first, and then it became this weird kind of homoerotic friendship, and then eventually at some point we did date, and we broke up after that. So, like, different groups of people have heard different parts of the story. Some of them have heard the friendship portion, some of them have heard the relationship and breakup portion. But I think the reason why I wanted to talk about it today is because, like, this particular relationship was not quite as simple as just friends, not quite as simple as just girlfriends, and even putting it under the term homoerotic friendship or homoerotic sapphic friendship doesn't quite fully cover the whole essence of it, I suppose. And I think the reason why that is because of this, like I said, the underpinnings of trauma, and also, you know, like, mentioning it would also reveal that I'm queer, which sometimes there's just no need to, or maybe the person that I'm talking to doesn't have the kind of attitude that, you know, I want to fight that day. Like, some people, yeah, probably, like, anyway. So before I get too sidetracked about why I find it difficult to talk about, let's just talk about what it was briefly. So this girl, I met her when I was 8, and then became best friends relatively quickly, the way people do when they have the same classes and spend a lot of time together. Right? And I think something that is hard to fully capture in just a few words is really the invasiveness makes it sound more negative than it really is. Maybe pervasiveness would be a better word. So I think the thing that's hard to describe is really the pervasiveness of how much time we spend together and how big of an influence we were both on each other while growing up. Like a lot of the hobbies that I have, for example, drawing, watching anime, which I kind of don't really do now, but like things like that, right? A lot of things that made up a big part of my tween and teen years were influenced greatly by the fact that I was friends with her and I was picking up on her interests, and not in a negative way, just like you just try things that your friends like because you want to hang out with your friends and you want to have common things to talk about. And along the way, some of these things stuck and became part of who I am. And I don't say this in a way to mean that like I regret the parts of me that have commonalities with what she had, or like that I only started because it was like stuff that she liked, right? Like these are parts of me that I happened to discover because of her being my friend. So yeah. So that was in the earlier years, somewhere when we were 12, 13. She realized that she was bisexual and she came out to me. And I think I was kind of blazed about it at that time. When she told me about it, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, really? Like I guess it sounds quite normal to me because I kind of feel the same way about boys and girls as well. So there was that. And then around the ages of like 13 to 18, I would say, was when the friendship kind of took on this strange homoerotic friendship vibe, which is the part that I usually don't end up telling people much about. So I think from the amount of like teen movies and all that chronicles that people have of teenage years, it's already quite obvious that, you know, humans going through changes during that period of time. We learn a lot about ourselves, and a lot of things are very confusing during those years. And like I think the thing that was very confusing was how she had a very strong hold over the title of best friend. And by this I mean, right, like there was a conversation I had with my junior college friend, so this was about 17 or 18 years old. I was gonna hang out with my JC classmates, and I don't remember the exact situation, but there was a clash in timing when I was supposed to be hanging out with this childhood best friend, right? And then what happened was that I told my classmates, sorry, I gotta go because I'm meeting my best friend. And then my classmate teased me and said like, oh, we're not friends, we're not best friends for you. And then I just said, because to me that was fact, like that was normal at that time. I was like, no, I only have one best friend and she's gonna be very upset if I claim anyone else as my best friend. And I say this with the full knowledge right now that that is not particularly normal. Like, that level of possessiveness over the term best friend is a little unusual, to say the least. And I think it's a theme, right, that like people who have experienced this kind of homoerotic friendship go through, which is that there is this strange in between of like not quite being friends, but you're not quite lovers exactly either. And like, it's a very weird situation. Anyway, so I think that particular interaction is pretty indicative of the kind of dynamics I had with her over those teen years. And then somewhere in our going on 20s and early 20s, we decided to date, which was also let's just say that was not a great relationship. And it wasn't like, it was relatively unhealthy and codependent, I would say, both because we each had our own childhood trauma and wounding to go through, to work through, which we haven't really figured out at that point, and also because of this underlying layer of being queer, right? And in particular of that relationship being visibly queer, like, because we are both bi, in that we can date men and therefore appear straight, like pass off as straight. Anyway, I hope the background noise is not too bad. But because we were dating each other, it was pretty obvious that that relationship was queer. And it was the first time for both of us to be in such a visibly queer relationship where other people looking from the outside can tell that you're queer. And I think with that came a lot of its own problems that we had to work through, which added to the fact that like we already had underlying issues of our own attachment wounds from childhood trauma to work through, and also our own just regular teenage growing up, puberty, growing into a young adult kind of stuff. Like, there was all of that, and there was attachment wounds, and there was queer visibility on top of that, which, you know, was just like not a good recipe. But anyway, so we ended up breaking up, and I learned a lot about myself from that breakup. And for a long time, when I told my friends about her, the last few years of our relationship, the early 20s, late 10s period, right, is what I would tell people about her. Like, they will kind of know her as my ex-girlfriend, you know, and then like, because the kick of the relationship was so, the breakup was so fresh that it kind of became like the easiest thing to talk about. So a lot of people, more, I would say, like, out of the people that I've told about this friend, most of them know about this breakup era just because it's like full of drama. And I needed to verbally talk it out to process through. So that was that, right? And for a long time, like, mind you, everything, like, the breakup is like at least 10 years in the past as I'm recording this now. And for a long time after that breakup, for like 3 or 4 years, I thought that I was done processing that breakup. Like, and in a sense, I guess I was, but only the relationship portion of it, because that was the aspect of this relationship that I talked about with other people, the fact that we became girlfriends, and then we had certain issues that we had to work out. Like, for example, she would comment that I dress too butch, and then I'll tell her that I'm not trying to play into, because that is what she implied of me, right? That I'm trying to play into this idea that in a woman-loving woman relationship, that there is a femme and there's a butch, and because she's the femme, I end up trying to fit the role of the butch, right? Like, so she had been trying to say like I was trying too hard to fit into the stereotype, and I was trying to explain to her that no, I was just trying to find a dressing style that was comfortable for me, and it happened that it looks butch from the outside. And she couldn't accept that, right? Because like I said, we had to work out our own issues around being visibly queer. And yeah, so those were the things that I will talk about when I talked about her and the breakup. But then 2 or 3 years ago, I started to realize that I hadn't fully gotten over this relationship in general, like the 3 main arcs of it. But at that point, I only realized that I hadn't fully gotten over it because I never got to grieve the fact that we had a friendship breakup. And anyone who's had a really, really close friend would know that a friendship breakup is not quite the same as a relationship breakup, but it is a breakup all the same. And there are things that you need to grieve, a connection that is like that you have had that is now, no longer a part of your life. And I think the part that was difficult for me was because a lot of the childhood things, a lot of the friendship portion happened in childhood and made up a lot of like the components of who I later become as a person, right? Like my hobbies, my likes, my dislikes, the kind of media that I was drawn towards, the kind of thinking that I was drawn towards, fandom stuff, that kind of thing. So like talking about the friendship breakup was very important as well, and it was only in the last like year or 2 years that I started to realize that hey, I needed to grieve the friendship breakup as well. So there was that, right? So then by then I've grieved 2 phases of this particular relationship ending. And then more recently, I realized that maybe another layer underpinning that is the fact that I didn't get to talk about that weird portion in the middle, the homoerotic friendship portion of it, and to grieve it. And of course, talking about the whole 3 phases of it and how really each fed into the other, the fact that we were first childhood friends who influenced each other so much, and then this weird in-between phase of being kind of like too codependent to be just friends and having some sort of attraction, like things like when I went over to stay at her place. There was only one bed, yes, I know it's a trope, but there was only one bed. And then I felt self-conscious about it, right? So she offered me her bed and she slept on a mattress on the floor. And like, how do I put this? It's not the action itself that is weird. Like, honestly, the sleeping arrangement could be anything, right? Like, if you don't really care about the person in any romantic way, like, you probably don't really care whether you end up both sharing a bed. By the way, it's like a king or queen size bed, so like there's ample space. You don't have to touch each other if you don't want to. And like, it's not about the particular situation, but it's the fact that we minded this kind of small details so much. And it kind of fed off each other, right? I could tell that she minded that I didn't want to share a bed with her, which then made me feel bad that I didn't want to share a bed with her because I didn't want it to seem like I was taking advantage of her. Because underneath that, I had the feeling of like, yeah, I actually do have feelings that are more than a friend for her, and therefore I didn't want to take advantage of that by lying on the same bed with her. But then that made her feel bad, and like, it's just a very long spiral that wasn't very helpful. And like, all these things, like, honestly, at a point where we became a romantic relationship, right, it was kind of like long due, in the sense that, for me at least, like, I couldn't take that weird in-betweenness of friendship and romantic relationship anymore. And I would like to intercept this. I would like to like just pause this and say that, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with a relationship being somewhere between a friendship and a romantic relationship. Like, queer platonic relationships or I don't know how you want to call it, queer platonic relationships, queer platonic friendships. I forgot what the term is, but like those exist. But what I'm talking about is slightly different because it's not quite in that range, in the sense that we were not conscious of what we were doing. We were not conscious of the dynamics that we had inadvertently set up as a result, like I said, of our own attachment wounding. She was mostly anxiously attached, and I was mostly avoidantly attached. Like that anxious avoidant dynamic switches up sometimes, but there is that, and that attachment was codependent. And like that was already something that was brewing in that homoerotic friendship phase, right? And it was, to me, it was kind of like either we just have to go through with it, like actually try dating and see whether it will work out, which, like, no spoilers, but like it didn't. Yeah, I was just not going to be able to be friends with her anymore, right? Because I think that was just, yeah. Anyway, so it's difficult to talk about this without going into the details of like exactly what happened. And like, I'm not here to say that I was a saint. In fact, I was quite far from it. I had a lot of my own issues to work through during those periods, and like honestly, the reason why this particular relationship is in a way important, even though it has a lot of negative aspects as much as it had a lot of positive aspects in the past, right, is because of how much it's shown me in areas that I had triggers, I had trauma, I had things that I needed to heal and learn about myself and work on and let go and all of that. Like, that is why this relationship is important to me in my journey, not specifically in and of that relationship itself, but in my growth as a person. I can't divide who I am as a person now from whatever I've had to go through and learn from that relationship, which took like 10 over years to happen, right? And like, it's hard to talk about because of its complex nature. Like, we are about 20 minutes in this video and I've not even really talked about like any details, which anyway I don't intend to, because that's not the point of this video, right? But I mean, the point of this video really is to kind of just share this strange dynamic of a relationship that I had with this person that was once very important in my life and is now no longer in my life. And also to kind of reflect on how difficult it was to really process all of that grief from the resultant breakup, whether you want to see it as a relationship breakup, a friendship breakup, or like something else altogether. It's precisely because it's so layered and complex that it's difficult to even for me process in the first place, let alone talk about it with someone else, with another person. So I don't have much more to say on it, besides like the fact that like it's one of those things that I can't even say like I regret having been through it, because I can't imagine what kind of person I would be without this particular relationship. Like, it is so, because it started so young, right? Like I knew her from age 8. Like, I was 8 years old. And yeah, I just cannot imagine what I would be like as a person if I just never met her. So it's kind of like not the point to look back on it and be like, oh, if I just avoided this whole thing, then I don't have to face all this grief and work through all this trauma, all this like romantic trauma or attachment wounding particular to romantic relationships on top of all the other attachment traumas that I already have from childhood, right? Yeah, it's just like, it's not fair to say that, because that relationship was such a big part of who I am, and is still a very big part in having influenced who I am now. And it's so weird that like it's so difficult to talk about. It's so weird to feel like I can't talk about it a lot of the times, either because, like, let's say I'm with a group of co-workers, they don't know that I'm queer, and like I mentioned in the previous video, nowadays I don't deliberately insert the fact that I'm queer into every conversation, but like, if I want to talk about this, I kind of have to give a preamble to people, right, to sort of let them know that I'm queer in the first place before I like kind of dump all this other trauma related shit on them. So like, that makes it difficult to talk about in like people, in situations where like people are not quite close friends, but like I know them. And then like with close friends, very often like my conversations don't end up centering around the past. I mean, that's just the nature of like what I generally talk about with friends. And so it becomes weird, I guess. And it seems when I did a search on homoerotic friendships that it is not as uncommon as you would think. It's just that I guess the people who do go through it probably don't talk about it all that often. And maybe it just so happens that the people around me are not the ones who have experienced it. So yeah, if you have encountered any friendship, relationship, romantic relationship, homoerotic friendship, whatever you want to call it, of such a similar complex nature, and you want to share, please write it in the comments below. Yeah, like I made this video mostly to get things off my chest in a way that like, because I'm ready to share this, but there is no good avenue for me to share this, and honestly sometimes I don't really need to share this with my friends. Like I will talk about snippets of this as and when it's relevant, but I don't talk about the whole thing like I just did, right? Yeah, but then at the same time, it's just kind of like, I don't know, I hope that maybe by sharing this, people who have experienced something like this don't feel so alone. Like I know I've definitely searched homoerotic friendship breakups whenever I've been trying to process this. So I don't know, let me know whether this video helped in any way, or whether, yeah, oh well, anyway, that was not a very elegant conclusion, but it doesn't seem like I end my videos elegantly anyway. So I'm just glad I got this off my chest, and hopefully I don't have to keep going back and forth with this anymore. So that's all for today's video. Thank you for listening to me talk about this, and I hope the trigger warning at the start was sufficient. If not, let me know if there's anything I can tag in the description to kind of help it out. That's all for today. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.